Good evening and welcome to the May 8, 2019 Civil Service Commission meeting for the City of Glendale. My name is Garo Gazarian. I am the Vice Chair of the Commission, sitting in for Chair McCarley, who is absent. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Here.
For the record, Chair McCarley is absent.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Minutes for the meeting of April 10, 2019.
Move to approve, dispense from reading.
Second.
Anybody opposed? No? I think it'll be by consensus, absent Chair McCarley. Thank you. Next item, please.
Oral communications?
I see no cards and no one approaching the podium. Next item, please.
Recruitment and examination report.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is our monthly report on recruitment and examination workload status. You see, again, a lot of activity. In fact, a pretty good increase from the previous month. We have 71 total recruitment and selection processes at various points. This is a little higher than last month, and again, it's just a very continuous amount of busy recruitment. It seems as we establish lists, we get more requisitions coming in. So, again, if the Commission has any questions on any of these recruitments, be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, this is a note and file item.
Thank you. Any questions? I see no questions. Thank you. Next item, please.
Eligible list established.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is our eligible list that have been established over the last month. As you can see, a pretty high number. Once again, we had 11 lists that have been established. 7 of them are promotional, 3 open, and 1 promotional and open. And as you can see, I want to emphasize again how challenging it is to make it through these processes, and really the high standard we hold in doing these recruitment processes. You see a large number of applicants for several of these, numbering into the hundreds, and then ultimately through the various examination procedures, we usually end up with a pretty small list of, in some cases, 2 or 3 names. Again, it's, I think, a demonstration of the challenges we have in attracting strong candidates for these positions, and really the high standards that we employ in these recruitment processes. So anyway, with that, this too is a note and file item. If there are any questions about any of these recruitments and these lists, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
I just want to confirm on the last item, is that 801 applications for that?
Yes. Yes, Commissioner Manukian, that is 801 applications received. Wow. And again, a total of 8 made it onto the list. So okay. That's a sort of an entry-level position. So we did, I think, written examinations and essay exams, and then oral boards ultimately. But that's kind of what it takes to get good quality candidates. So we hope to use that list more than once.
I hope so.
Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you. Next item, please.
Class specification and job bulletin for approval. Human Resources Administrator.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a class specification and bulletin for, happens to be our department, Human Resources. This is for a Human Resources Administrator position. There's really 2 actions tonight. One would be the modification of the existing class specification, and then the second part would be the approval of an open bulletin. On this, really the specification, it's really an updating of one that hasn't been updated since 2003. I think that's when I was appointed to this job many years ago. The changes are mainly updating, more details, and there's, I think, some specifics on some of the laws that are applicable to our profession, a little more contemporary. And because it is an administrator position, we felt it should have some supervisory experience requirement. Thus, we've added 2 years of experience supervision, as well as public sector experience being a desirable qualification. With regard to the bulletin, we are seeking an open recruitment process. Previously, this was done on a promotional basis, but once again, we're looking for a broader pool of candidates for this position, and hope to get your approval in this endeavor. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
Commissioner Devine?
Several questions. First of all, when you say open exam, how far open is it? Is it just within the city? Is it within Glendale? Is it within nationwide? How big a net are we spreading on this one?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, when we say open, we mean that it would be open outside the organization as opposed to promotional, where it's just limited to candidates who currently work within the city. But our intent for a position at this level would be to advertise in the greater Southern California region, perhaps reaching to Northern California, that area. There are some both local and state organizations that deal with human resources, employment, labor relations, and we would reach out to those organizations, those websites, and advertise there. But I would anticipate the most viable candidates coming from generally the LA County area and perhaps a little bit beyond that.
Okay. I have several other questions, Mr. Chair.
Sure, please.
Right now, looking in your own department, how many candidates would qualify to take the exam in terms of the 2-year experience and the supervisory level?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, as far as the 2-year experience level, I don't think we would have any that would qualify internally.
If you didn't have that new requirement for the 2-year supervisory experience, would anybody in your department qualify to take the exam?
Perhaps one, and that would be close. This is a position to replace Manya Hunanian, who was our deputy director for many years, and it's been downgraded to this level. It was actually kind of a budgetary move in this past year, but that would be our intent.
Okay. According to your org chart, there are 4 positions that this position would be supervising. Is that accurate? And if so, are all 4 of those positions filled now?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, the org chart is more of a functional org chart. Let me find it real fast here. This individual wouldn't necessarily be supervising all of those people underneath. It just depends on what their expertise is, what they're familiar with, that sort of thing. But to some degree, right now, pretty much the entire staff, both professional and administrative and clerical, most of them are reporting to my assistant director, and it's a number exceeding almost 10 direct reports. And I need to have a position, not quite at that level, but at an appropriate level to relieve her of some of the burden of all that supervision. So I would anticipate we'd probably want to have maybe 3 or 4 individuals report to this person, either the HR associates or the HR analyst 2, that sort of thing. But that hasn't been, particularly decided upon quite yet.
And do you know if there are other departments within the city of Glendale that have people that could be eligible to take this exam? In other words, one of the requirements is that they have to have experience in human resource administration. And with that in mind, are there other departments within the city that have a human resource element that they might be able to qualify for this exam rather than going to another city within the state?
Commissioner Devine, we don't have other departments with their own human resources functions any longer. We've done that in the past. I once had someone embedded within the police department or people within water and power. We don't do that anymore because it's best we are a centralized human resources function. We're responsible for the entire city, and we found it's best to keep it within my department. Having said that, there is an individual who used to work for me who is now within water and power who would meet the qualifications for this, but is, I believe, paid higher. He's in a higher position right now in that department.
So for all intent, if I understand correctly, nobody within the city would be eligible to take this exam or apply for the position it would have to come from outside the city, is that?
That would be my expectation, yes.
While you're pausing, just a quick note, anyone from the city could still take the exam if they want to, even though it's an open exam, correct?
Well, they could apply, of
Can
course.
apply,
yes.
that's what I meant, right? They can at least apply. I mean, just nothing prevents them from doing that.
Yeah, but when they,
Commissioner Abkarian just articulated that which I wrote on a piece of paper. Nobody within this city who may see themselves as eligible is exempt from taking this exam. They can take this exam.
I saw what you wrote
Right,
down.
yeah, yeah.
I'll go ahead of you.
That's good.
all right, but it would kind of be a meaningless task because they wouldn't meet the requirements either in terms of having human resource administration experience or the 2 years supervisory. So I believe my colleagues are correct that anybody could take it, but with these qualifications, they really wouldn't be eligible to be appointed.
I would anticipate not. That's correct.
And the last question, and I know this appears on many of our bulletins or our specs, it says, note an equivalent combination of experience as education and training may substitute for the listed minimum requirements. And I wonder if you could just give me a couple of examples where the equivalent experience could be, what type of equivalent experience could be substituted for, say, the 2 years supervisory experience or the experience in human resources administration.
Commissioner Devine, I could answer that specifically or in general terms.
Just in general terms.
This is language that appears on all of our bulletins and job descriptions. And typically that would mean that if an individual has let's look at either a level of experience or conversely a level of education which greatly exceeds what's stated on the bulletin, and that could substitute for a shortcoming in the other areas. A perfect example would be if we were advertising for a position that required a bachelor's degree and 5 years of experience. Okay, if we had an individual come in who had an Associate of Arts degree, yet 20 years of directly relevant experience, and that person presented themselves to our department and said, look, I don't have the bachelor's degree, but here's my resume, look at all of the things I've done, I think I'd be a good candidate. We would look at that, and typically those types of decisions come to my level. It's not something that the individual staff necessarily is authorized to grant, but that would be an example where someone's experience far exceeds the experience requirement they may be lacking. Conversely, on the other side of it, you could have somebody who's, let's say the very same position, requires 5 years experience and a bachelor's degree, and we come across a candidate who has, 4 years experience, yet they have a master's degree. That would be a similar circumstance where I could look at that and say, okay, that seems like a reasonable substitution. So those types of things, we do those to ensure that that there's some level of flexibility in the process to where we can factor those things into the selection process and get the best candidate for the job.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just have just one quick note. On page 10, 204, it says drives on city bus. City business, I'm sorry. Should we just make that like we're required to drive on city business? Something a little bit more than just drives on city business?
Commissioner Abkarian, that is under the section which describes the essential functions, essentially the duties. That's not the area of the requirements. I know it's probably a minor distinction, but we're trying to, in that section, list what the duties would be. And in a position at this level, we have tests that are administered off-sites, meetings that are administered off-sites. So we would want the individual to have the ability to get around to other locations.
It says drives on city business.
Wherever. It could be driving to San Francisco instead of business.
Doesn't really describe, okay, whatever it is, that's fine, as long as everyone's okay. I'll second Commissioner Mnuchin's,
Very well. Do we take roll call on this? Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mnuchin? Commissioner Abkarian?
yes.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes,
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
thank you. Next item, please.
Job bulletins for approval, energy marketer trader and power systems analyst.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a pair of job bulletins for approval, and we've kind of paired them up because they're very similar. They're in the same department and division and section within the Water and Power Department. The two positions are energy marketer trader and power systems analyst, and these are two very specialized positions within the managerial ranks of water and power. While in the past we have had some internal candidates who were kind of on their way up that enabled us to recruit from within and fill some of these positions internally with a promotional process, we don't feel that we have the luxury right now, and therefore we're seeking to make these open examinations. Again, the nuances of these positions are very, very unique, and I can't even begin to describe the types of work that they do in this whole arena. But I do have individuals here who could do so if you care to get any specifics. But again, this is a request for open bulletins. Again, if you have questions, be happy to try and answer them. Mark Young, who is our Integrated Resources Planning Administrator for Water and Power, is here, as is Mr. Vardanian from my staff, if you want to ask questions.
Questions? No questions? Move to approve. Okay. Second?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mnuchin?
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes,
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes,
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
thank you. Next item, please.
Job bulletin for approval, police lieutenant.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a job bulletin for approval for the police lieutenant position. This is being brought for your review and approval because it is a sworn safety position within the police department, and our rules require that all of these be brought before you. I do want to say before we get into this that just prior to the meeting, an alternative bulletin was handed out to you, and I'll get into why that change was made. But essentially, this is a bulletin within the managerial ranks of the police department. It is fully consistent with the class specification, with one exception, and the specification does indicate that the person would have to have been a supervisor in the patrol bureau for at least 1 year, and that's typically the standard with what we would want to do before somebody promotes to lieutenant. In this case, we have had situations both in previous administrations of this exam and certainly the current situation where individuals may have some very strong expertise in a particular area, and they may be called or assigned to one of the specialty bureaus within the department to supervise that bureau, and it might take them out of the patrol assignment prematurely, and that's really through no fault of those candidates, through no fault of their own. It's really sort of a managerial decision, and I think the recommendation here would be not to penalize any individual who is called to serve in that capacity, whether they have 1 year in patrol or could be 1 year in detective or any of the other specialty bureaus. The second part and this isn't a modification, but it's just something we want to make you aware of as far as the selection process. We've traditionally done a professional panel as well as a tactical exercise, and then a community panel and an internal panel. And we want to keep all of those elements, but the last time we administered this test, the tactical exercise was done on a separate day. In fact, it might have been a separate week. And I think that was graded, and then they were invited back for the remaining portions. And just in the interests of time and economy as far as getting the interview panels together, we thought we would include that tactical exercise the same day as all the other portions and have that professional panel grade that portion of it as well. So they'll go through that exercise, and then they'll be asked questions from a professional panel about the tactical exercise, why they made the decisions to deploy resources in that particular fashion, and then settle into the traditional interview panel questions that you would expect from an oral professional panel. And then the other part of it would be the community panel and the internal panel, which again, this is how we've done it with the lieutenant's exam, where it's done together, where the internal panel and community panel can both address the candidates from those varying perspectives. So with that, that's really the changes. And again, the bulletin that was sent to you in your original packet had an issue relating to the bachelor degree requirement, which is a minimum qualification for this position. And there was a thought that candidates who don't yet have their bachelor's degree, we would let them apply. And as long as they have their bachelor's degree by the time of the appointment, that we would allow for that. But I had a conversation with the chief this morning as to whether this is really that essential. He and I both agreed that it's not really an issue. And there was some discussion later on this afternoon with the Management Association about this, and I think we all agreed to just not make any change in that regard. So the position requires a bachelor's degree, and that's what we're going to stick with. So with that, if you have questions, Chief Povolitis is here, and Mr. Chavez is here, and if you'd like to hear from them, I'll yield my time. So,
Questions? Please.
I have a question on the combination of the tactical and the tactical exercise and the interview panel, professional interview panel. In the selection process, it indicates candidates must achieve a minimum passing score of 70% on each test component. And it's my understanding that in the past, the test component of the tactical exam and the test component of the interview panel professional were separate, and they would have to get 70% in each one of those components. So my question is, with this combination, is it possible, is the tactical and the interview still considered as separate components, or is that function considered as one component where they could possibly get 20% on the tactical, but 80% on the professional, and therefore still qualify if they fail the tactical?
Commissioner Vine, that's a great question. I can answer, or we can let the chief. But my sense is they would still have to attain a passing score of both of those components, and then the scores would be combined. Is that how you see it, Chief?
I think I'll just give you our Corporal Povolitis Police Chief. Our past experience with this is short of maybe somebody doing something unconstitutional on the tactical. Most people work their way through it, so I'm less concerned with the tactical, except in that thing most people then proceed through it. So allowing the professional panel to do both, even if the score is combined, is going to be a non-issue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
All I have.
Move to approve?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes.
Commissioner Karian? Yes. Commissioner Kazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Reports?
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, the only report we have is your monthly job performance evaluations past due report. This is the second month under the new policies relative to our late notices. I think it's working well. We have no second notices. Funny how that works. And
they said it could not be done.
as well. We have some first notices, but really the good news is that there are only 3 departments that have first notices and 12 departments that have no no late evaluations at all. So I think it's a good report, and I hope as we move along, we continue to hold our managers and departments accountable in this regard. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, this is no file.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Next item, please.
Civil Service Commission, staff comments.
Any comments? Yes.
Yes, some time ago, we received actually it was a memo, and then I believe the gentleman came in during Oral Communications, Mr. Alvarez, and he presented some concerns to the commission, and in response to those concerns, Mr. Doyle wrote a very comprehensive, detailed memorandum dated March 12, 2019, in which he addressed many of the concerns that Mr. Alvarez brought forth. However, there were two basic concerns, and the second one was concerning the makeup of the oral interview panels on promotional exams. And well, my first question is, according to the Civil Service rules, it says, if an in-house oral board examination panelist is selected, he or she shall not be involved in the final hiring decision following certification of the top 3 ranks. Whenever possible, in-house oral board panelists will not be utilized for promotional exams. And then it says, unless a promotability panel or internal panel is used. And I'm wondering if you could explain what that means.
Commissioner Devine, unless an internal a promotability panel, or promotability typically is something that's done within the mainly public safety area with police sergeant exam. It's done with police lieutenant exam, I believe. Yeah, we have an internal, and it's specifically designed to address the the accomplishments of existing officers or candidates for that position, to where in contrast to a panel that has no knowledge whatsoever of those candidates, and they're more or less making that evaluation based on the 30 to 45 minutes they get to spend with that candidate. The internal panels, the promotability panels, address with actual accomplishments, assignments. To some degree, job performance is looked at, and it's sort of I don't know how to say it, but keeping the candidate honest, where they can't come in and say, "Oh, I've done all of these things, for the department or for the organization," when in fact, that may not be true. Where you actually have peers in the room who have who've been in a situation to know whether those things have actually occurred. So
Okay.
it's not used often, and as obviously it can be fraught with conflicts of interest and things like that, but it is used, and it's a valuable tool in some
explains
occasions.
that. Mr. Alvarez's main concern on that issue was he felt that by using internal panelists on these promotional exams, there could be the specter of bias, and he listed a whole bunch of things that he believed could cause a problem, and an unfair exam. And he was suggesting that the Civil Service rules be changed to prevent internal panelists from participating in promotional exams. And again, Mr. Doyle, you wrote an excellent reply to that, making very good points as to why that should not and cannot be done. However, in your replies, you mentioned several things that raise some questions in my mind, and at this point I would like to ask for a concurrence from one of my colleagues for a report from staff that would address, first of all, the overall methods of creating these panels and the pros and cons of using the internal panelists for promotional exams, and in addition to address several areas in your reply that raise questions. For example, you say, while excluding internal panelists on promotional selection processes would seem ideal from the standpoint of objectivity and the avoidance of potential conflicts of interest, there are plenty of occasions where in-house panelists can be used without sacrificing the integrity, blah, blah, of the process. And so one question that came to my mind is, on what occasions would the use of internal panels sacrifice the objectivity?
Just a quick note, just asking Ms. Marbedian. I don't think we can ask questions on this item, just comments from the commission, correct?
I think what Commissioner Carey and I think what Commissioner Devine is doing is he is trying to articulate a request for a future report.
Yes.
I'll second that.
And the item for those report, not questions,
Not
just
now.
items. Okay.
No, this is
Okay.
things that I want to make sure they include in the
Got it.
report whenever it comes before us. So another area, you say in countering or explaining why internal panelists should be used, and if there's a problem, you say the process allows both the interview panelists and the candidates the ability to have the panelists recused from the process if a potential conflict is apparent. And from my own experience, I know that if you go in and you ask to have a panelist removed from your interview panel for whatever reason, that taints the objectivity of the remaining panelists, because the question is, why? So again, it creates a question in my mind of whether that's really a fair or a proper way to address the issue of using internal panelists. Then you say very often, rather than having to postpone the interviews, staff will seek a panelist within the organization with no potential conflicts. This unfortunately happens more frequently than in the past. And again, the word potential raises a question in my mind, so I would like the report to address what you consider as a potential conflict that would cause a internal panelist not to be included in the exam process. So those are the types of things, the basic things in your reply that raise questions in my mind that, again, whenever you can bring the report to us, I would appreciate it if you could address those items specifically, in addition to the overall process. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I want to just.
Yes.
I need a second from somebody.
You had a second.
Oh, well, thank you.
Commissioner Mnuchin.
I just want to, while we're doing that, with that same report, while you're at it, Mr. Doyle, you have nothing else to do, of course. If you can just, I want to just see how they score this, even in a professional panel or a internal panel. How does the scoring of this thing go? Do they have to get 70% here, 20%? I mean, I just want to see one sample as to what it looks like and how they score these things and what does the candidate need to do. So I just need to get an idea, because I've never had this in 12 years I've been here. I don't know how they score the internal panel and the professional panel.
I'm assuming you mean by redacting the name of the applicant that they might.
No, I want the applicant's name to be in there so I can see it.
Okay.
What I meant as a sample is just an empty one, and they can bring it in and say, this is how we would score one, and this is what happens, and if they don't get this much here, they won't make it. So this way, then we can get a general idea as to how some of these people are told to score these things.
Certainly. We can do this.
Very well.
And we're going to call a special meeting in a couple of days, and you need to have that report to us, by the way. Just kidding.
We're not requiring this to be done in 30 days, 60, 90 days,
I was
120
thinking more
days.
like tomorrow. Maybe.
I'll be absent tomorrow.
Oh, okay. No, I
Very
don't
well.
see any big rush on this,
All
a
right.
couple of months.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could clarify that.
Sure.
It would be a very broad report on how oral boards are formed and scored, making sure to address Commissioner Devine's specific items, or do you just want to zero in on what has been requested here?
Yeah, well, the Commissioner Devine talked about the internal panel and the likelihood of bias. It made me think, as I sat and listened, that if I'm in an employment setting and I am the employer or the supervisor and I want to promote someone within my staff, it's kind of, bringing somebody from the outside to determine that person's abilities and qualifications for promotion may indeed be objective, but I'm not sure it may be entirely useful. So there must be some internal component, wouldn't you agree?
Well,
Perhaps, but I don't know about internal component absent, of course, bias. So
Okay,
that's
well, the way I understand the process, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Doyle, in answer to Commissioner Kazarian's question, the internal panel is the one that interviews the full cadre of people. There might be 15, 20 people, and they come up with the ranking on those. And those are the ones that end up 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
When they go to pick the top 3 for the appointing authority to pick someone, those would be internal, the people like you're saying, the ones that work in that department. But my feeling is, based on what I read from Mr. Alvarez's concerns, and I share the same concerns, that the selection of the top 3, or the ranking of all of them, should come from, unless Mr. Doyle comes up with some other answer, should come from people that are totally unbiased and not interested in getting their brother-in-law in the top 3. But once the top 3 are picked, then I agree that the internal panel, whatever appointing department.
Just so we could, if I may, Chair Gazarian, I think we've received the proper direction. This isn't an agendized item, so I would just ask that we limit the discussion on it, unless there's any additional questions to elaborate on the content of the report.
No, so my comment, as a commission comment, if you will, is to please include in that report the necessity for an internal panel or the lack thereof, and the context of bias and the assurances of no bias in whichever direction the matter proceeds. Thank you. Very well.
And Mr. Chair, something Commissioner Devine said confused me, because it sounded like you said the way it works is that an internal panel puts does the initial process with 15 people, and then a list is established. It sounded like that's what you said. And
That is my understanding of the way it works, that you have a...
That would be incorrect then.
That would be incorrect.
A typical process would involving, let's say a promotional exam would involve...
Matt, I really, just so we don't have anyone question us 6 months down the
All
road.
right, so then maybe we'll have a comprehensive
But I-
report that talks about, again, the process.
I do think, though, Mr. Doyle should correct the record if it was misstated.
It was very much misstated. Typically, the typical process would involve an outside panel doing that initial oral board process, or whatever it is, in the establishment of a list. Then the top 3 names would go to the department, who would have, whatever, the department head or the department supervisors involved in making that final decision from among the top 3. What you said sounded just the opposite of that, and I just wanted to correct that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think that's a pretty healthy Civil Service Commission staff comments session. I don't recall anything like it in the past. Next item, please. I think it appears next item. Please read it for the record.
Closed session, public employee discipline, police officer.
Very well. We will be going into closed session. We will not be reporting out, or we will be reporting
Yeah.
out.
We will not be televised.
Not on camera.
Not on camera. Yes, we will report out, but not on camera. And we will adjourn thereafter. Thank you.